Welcome to the Raising Cinephiles podcast, a show about passing on your love of cinema to the next generation. I'm your host, Jessica Kantor, and I have worked in all facets of the entertainment industry for the last 20 years, and recently became a mom. This week, our guest is director Stephanie Laing. She's a prolific filmmaker that tackles subject matter that's true or deals with real topics. We discuss her most recent project, Apple TV's Physical, and how raising a cinephile entails watching challenging stories. Stephanie also shares how her children love cinema and also can be some of the harshest critics. Always remember that myself and guests are speaking from personal experience and not giving parenting advice. Let's go ahead and dive into the episode. Hi, and welcome back to the Raising Cinephiles podcast. This is your host, Jessica Kantor, and today I am here with director Stephanie Laing, most recently directing Physical on Apple TV. I'm so excited to have you here. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
I'm going to jump into our first question. What is your first movie memory?
My first movie memory is Grease. I went to see it in the theater at a very, very young age, and it was packed and completely not like completely a fire hazard because people were sitting in the aisles.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that's my very first memory of
Grease
that.
had a huge impact on me as a kid. In my younger years, I lived in a small town in Florida, and they had a sock hop. And so I wore black spandex and a black top, and everybody made fun of me because nobody got that I was dressing up as Sandy.
I didn't understand. That's funny. I mean, I need to feel like I need to look it up to see what year it came out to realize how young I was. But I was not, I must have been like 5. I just remember sitting next to my parents in the aisle and just like loving every second of it and just feeling so at home.
Mm-hmm. And what was the ritual with your family going to see movies as you were growing up?
We went every weekend. Like I feel like it was just always such a part of our family. You know, I grew up in the Midwest in Cincinnati, Ohio, and I think our weekends were really always structured around like 2 restaurants because it was a small town at the time. And then the movie, like what could we see? And then sometimes we would go to a concert, but that was rare.
Yeah. And then as you were growing up, I always think the transition of what your parents feed you versus what you start to choose, really interesting, and curious what that transition was like for you.
Well, I have an older brother, and I started like sneaking and watching horror films. And so I have a distinct memory of hiding in the living room and watching Phantasm and being scared to death, but like also like sneaking and trying to watch like any Halloween movie or anything, like that. So it just became all about these horror films that I was not allowed to be watching at the time, but just would do anything I could to watch them. So maybe that's shaped my dark sensibility in some way.
And how old were you when you started having this appetite for horror?
I would have, I guess, like 10, maybe 8 to 10, because it was definitely, I should definitely not have been watching Phantasm. I remember being like watching it and so scared that which is irrational when I say what I did to, I packed up all my stuffed animals in a bag and was like prepared to get them out of the house if something happened to the stuffed animals. So it was not a rational reaction to watching a horror film, but I was going to save my stuffed animals.
Yeah. Well, you loved them, right? I think about the relationship my son has with his stuffed animals that he's 21 months, but he feeds them and loves them.
I know. It's just like very distinct memory of this trash bag of stuffed animals that I think lived in the trash bag for several months because it was like, something's going to happen. I got to get them out the window.
Oh, that's great. Terrifying. And if your parents had found out that you were watching these horror films, did they find out, or like what was that?
I don't think they ever knew at all. Like, to be honest, I don't think they had a clue. And then I think because then I just went from horror films for me to like the complete opposite of like When Harry Met Sally or Parenthood, it's like going to see Parenthood, the original film, like as many times as I possibly could in the theater. And sort of I went from like horror straight to comedy.
I also loved Parenthood. I watched it many, many times. And if you think about that movie now, I don't think it would have ever gone to theaters.
No, There's no way, right? I mean, no, and it's so complex and so nuanced. And I mean, I think about Diane Weist's line all the time where she's like, I peed in a field, I was at Woodstock. I'm not like what my obsession was with watching that movie. I'm not sure, but it felt so real.
It felt really real. And that, I don't know, I must have been too young I must have been 11 or 12 when I was watching it, if not younger. And I saw it in theaters too. And I think maybe I felt like I was getting an adult view of the world.
Yeah. Yeah.
Perhaps, it was so honest, and the relationships and the sexual relationships and the teenager hating his mom and
Oh yeah, I know. I think that's it. I think you're right. I think I don't know how old I was when I was watching it, but definitely, yeah, I think it really painted, like I felt like I was in on this adult group or this, and also a big family. And I come from a small family. And so there's something really appealing about that and like the closeness, but also the fights and just how honest all the comedy felt and just and how like catchy it was. I mean, Steve Martin is like he's incredible in that.
Yeah. You bring it up and I think about, and it's been a long time since I saw it, so please correct me if I'm completely wrong, but there is some parallel visually of that to Physical. It's almost in the similar era, right?
Yeah, I don't know. You're not wrong, and I've not put that together at all until just talking to you about it. I don't know what year that's supposed to be in, but it has to be within that same time frame, and it does feel very like the wardrobe is similar, like for some of the characters, like certainly Mary Steenburgen and oh my God, the woman who plays Rick Moranis' wife, like they're very much dressed. It's like it has to be within that time period. So maybe that's also shaped the way I want to tell stories in ways I didn't even think about until now.
Yeah, well, and also there was a darkness, that undercurrent, what was happening in like the reality of that, and the undercurrent that's happening in Physical, which, if I'm honest, when I first started watching it, I had a lot of trouble, especially as a recovering disordered eater, I think is the right way to say it these days.
Yeah.
But it was really hard for me to engage in the freneticism of it, because I have to say, like, the freedom I had as I recovered was the space in my mind.
Oh, that's interesting.
And so I really felt that throughout this, especially this most recent season, of how she's battling, and I think for me also, it was the like planning of it, of finding the space for the disorder in my life and how much room it took and how heavy that was. And when that went away, I was like, oh, I can be productive with life because I have room and space. And so yeah, it was very hard at first for me to watch it, and I went back and went through it, and it's still hard to watch, but it definitely resonates with me.
Yeah, it's interesting because I found, like, I read the script, obviously, Craig Gillespie directed the first episode, and I was brought in season 1 to do half the season. And I too, like, suffer from my own form of disordered eating. So I felt I related to it. And I was like, oh, her voice is really mean to herself and to other people. How are we going to pull that off? And I think we wanted it to be, disconcerting, right? It's not an easy, because I think when people, especially season 1, people came into it thinking it's going to be this fun 80s show and it's just fun. It's like, no, there's a very dark undertone here of something that's very real for so many women and men. And we just really wanted to present that as honestly as we could. And so I think for me, visually, like when tackling those scenes, it changed from season to season how we tackled them. But certainly, like, taking such care with them, but also knowing it was going to make people feel uncomfortable, because I felt uncomfortable, even in the way that I relate to it. And it's so interesting what you say about this space in your brain, because it's such like your intrusive thoughts are such a violation sometimes. You're thinking that out. So yeah, it's an important show that's very deep, disguised in some ways as a fun ride about with aerobics and 80s music. It's a really fun costume.
Yeah, it definitely has a huge amount of depth, and I especially being a parent watching it and, giving her a daughter specifically,
Yes.
as a, and I think about the cycles of disordered eating through generations. Yeah, I'm curious, I don't know if you have daughters or sons, but how that.
I have both. And I will say, like, much like they always say, art, imitates life in reverse. Like, my daughter she does suffer from disordered eating. And it's not something I talk about very often, but it was very interesting because she didn't, it wasn't really something she dealt with until I was already on physical. So it did become this like interesting thing of like, wait, I suffer from this. Now she's suffering from her own version of this. And to be honest, like it's also like I don't want her to watch the show right now. I think it's too new for her, right? She is like just kind of diagnosed and dealing with it. And I'm like, I don't normally they watch my stuff. I'm like, I don't know if this one is the right one,
Yeah, it's like too soon.
Mm.
It's like, you're dealing with your own kind of that voice, but I was having a conversation with my mom the other day, and that's something she's working on, speaking kinder to herself, and what a
Yes.
challenge that is for so many women, and even outside of disordered eating, of just, you're also watching a woman starting a business and discover who she is outside of where the patriarch was then, which was definitely even more intrusive than it is today in some ways. It was really interesting too in season 3 how getting rid of that voice actually in some ways she thought might have been hurting her motivation, because it's so hard to be a woman in business that it fueled her in a lot of ways. And so it was a really, really interesting juxtaposition.
Yeah, because we think that we always, when we're suffering from something, right, we feel like we thrive in chaos, or we need this, this negative thing to fuel us. And I think it's absolutely, I mean, that was intentional to like that moment when the voice goes away. And then it's like, I mean, I think even at the end of season 2, when she says, I don't know if I still have it in me anymore,
Yeah.
fight, and as it comes back to her. But I relate to that too, about just how we talk to our kids. Or I find myself like all the time stopping what I'm saying when you're like, oh, I'm like, because women do this all the time. They're like, I'm going to be good today. You're like, what does that even mean? My mom used to say that all the time. I'm only having salads. I'm only having salads for the rest of the week. You're like, that is not true. You're not going to only have salads for the rest of the week. Why are you saying that to yourself? And then setting up a vicious cycle for yourself, or a circle that you've said, now you disappoint yourself when you know you're not going to have the salad. So why say that?
Yeah.
We constantly set ourselves up that way. So this new language with my kids, myself as well, of just like, I'm going to eat healthy today. I'm going to eat when I'm hungry today. And tomorrow I might have this thing, and there's nothing wrong with me or wrong with that. It's just a choice on your own in this moment. And I think if that's one of the things, hopefully, like people would do who do watch physical, can take, we're bringing light to something that's so rarely shown on television at all, and have a conversation about it, or even have their own internal thoughts about it, and just accepting themselves for, who they are, and making choices, and not saying like, living up to society's need to say, or, wanting to conform to society of like, I have to be better today. What is that even? I don't know. What does that mean?
And I mean, it was, I love when she was in the rehab-ish center. I don't know if it's considered rehab, but therapy center. The meditation with the food, and like the journey around that. And, one of the things for me that actually helped my relationship with food was learning to taste, like just really taking the time to let food be a joy, let it be fuel, let it make me strong. And in teaching my son to eat, it's so interesting, especially with a toddler, it's like trying so hard not to say just have one more bite, like allowing him to really listen to his body, to introduce all sorts of different kinds of foods and let him develop flavor and taste, and then also let him know what food does for him. Like, this is going to help your eyesight, and this is going to give you muscles, and, and how it's not seen as something that's like, I mean, I remember as a teenager having to go out to dinner and eating as quickly as possible because I just wanted it to be over. It was such torture to sit at a table around food.
God, it makes so much sense. I like, and when my kids were toddlers too, just like laying the food out and being like, okay, you're just going to come by and graze at some point. You're going to eat something when your body tells you that you want to eat. And I mean, it is one of my favorite scenes in the series, that when they all try the orange in that therapy session, and in directing it, talking to every actor of just like how your character would taste this orange, like how you would go about that, and really trying to just have them each do it in a different way, that we all would, as human beings. So I really loved that scene, just like when she peels it finally. And like you said, it's just this ability to let yourself taste something and enjoy it for how it fuels your body. I mean, my daughter was vegetarian. She would probably still say she is, but she's not, because she has chicken on a regular basis. But for years, like my ex-husband would be like trying to force her to eat meat. And I'm like, it's not going to happen, except where we are, right?
Yeah.
Make too much of a thing out of it and just let her go through this. This is where she is right now. So let's just make sure she's eating healthy and it's not just cheese pizza all the time. And then maybe a year ago, she came to me and was like, I think I really want some chicken tonight. Is that okay? And it's like, of course it's okay. Maybe it's your body just telling you need protein and you should just try it. There's no judgment. And then you don't have it again if it's not for you, but it is interesting to see. She still says she's a vegetarian, but then she
has chicken from time to time.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is it like, instead of a pescatarian, a pulitarian?
Yeah, exactly.
Come up with a new term.
What's that? Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Very specific. It's just,
Yeah. And I, when I was a little girl, I would go into the refrigerator and eat butter by the stick. Like I would just bite into butter. My mom was so grossed out and would call a pediatrician, and they said like, I just needed it, so let me eat it. At that age, you just go for what your body needs. And when I'm making toast, I looked at my son one day and I was like, because he's like tall and skinny is his build, like since he was born. So it's like a forever for me and wanting to get some meat on his bones, And so I'm like, do you want a bite of butter? And he's like, yes. I saw him like licking it off the toast. More sauce. And I'm like, oh, you want more butter? Okay. So, it is whatever he needs. And then the next day he doesn't want anything. And then it's a whole carton of blueberries. It's like,
it depends, right? It's like you said, it's like sort of listening to what your body wants. If you can get to that place. And then sometimes your body wants a bag of Cheetos. Mm-hmm. That's okay too.
Yeah. So it's been a journey, and it's such an important show and journey. And it's so like conversations come up a lot in this podcast about introducing your children how different types of cinema. And I think what it means to be a cinephile is to be okay with not easy content, with the idea of being challenged, having your worldview challenged, having your culture challenged. And so it's really, I think this era of streaming, there's a lot of controversy against right now in this striking world or whatever, but there's something beautiful happening in television where we're getting challenging content. It's not the typical broadcast television that had when we were younger. So,
it's not all wrapped in a pretty package that's like, this family is terrific. You're like, no, they're not. Or in the case of physical, like there's a lot of people struggling with real issues on the show and not making great choices, but still trying to. I mean, my kids, like, we've watched so many movies like through their childhood and stuff. And I'm going to come back to horror now. And I tell you that my daughter like wanted to have, she's a teenager, but she was like, how teenagers are. They like don't want to spend a lot of time with you. And I was filming physical, and I got this call from her. She was like, I really want to watch this movie with you tonight. I was like, oh my God, do you want to spend time with me? And so, yes, please. And she's like, let's watch in your room. We'll have popcorn. So she queued up this movie on my bed, and it was Goodnight Mommy. It was the original. And they just torture and kill the mother. I was like, wait a second.
What are you trying to tell me?
She's like, I just wanted to see it. And then, but it did come out like later, like she was angry with me for some stuff. It was just very interesting that like I feel like they can not that she wants to torture and kill me, but she felt like she could share this moment of anything. Like you said, it's like complicated shows or cinema that you're like, this is not an easy subject matter, but let's watch this together. And then we've bonded over. Also, she has a love of horror films, so now we just see every single horror movie there is and critique them, harshly. And then my son is like obsessed with animated movies. And I remembered, like, knowing I was going to be talking to you, I remembered a moment when he was in elementary school. We were watching, he hated Frozen, like hated it. It was such a passion, and loved the Kung Fu Panda. I think it was 2 or something that came out that year. And when the Golden Globes came on and they announced like Frozen won, he stood up screaming and was so mad. He was like, I can't take this shit. It's not Frozen. It was very, very opinionated about it. So I'm definitely raising kids who are very opinionated on their cinema.
Do you remember the first films you showed them?
One of the first films that they saw was Up.
Was Huck?
Up.
Okay.
Yeah, and Ratatouille. And they're very divided. 2 of them think that Up is a better movie, and one of them thinks that Ratatouille is. But I think that, I just remember being in the cinema with them watching Up and how much they loved it,
How old were they?
When did that come out? I feel like I'm going to look it up so I can tell you.
I ask these questions because I'm trying to figure out when's the right time to bring my son to the cinema.
Yeah. Mine were little.
2009.
2009. So my son would have been, so 4, 3, and 2.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the 2-year-old was okay?
I don't think he remembers much of it, but he was okay. Yes. Yeah. I think that, and then we just went to movies all the time. I mean, and the 2-year-old is the one who hated Frozen and would get mad, didn't want to share popcorn at the cinema. It had to be, his, when he should have popcorn and not, it's dangerous.
Yeah. Yes. I've been trying to think of a snack for under 5-year-olds that has the same feeling of popcorn, but won't be choking hazard.
Yeah, I know. I think we used to take like those little puffs. You took the puffs or goldfish crackers because it's like, I can't give you popcorn. It's too dangerous.
Yeah. And we do a lot of dehydrated fruits. So I'm trying to see if there's like a version of like a dehydrated corn that won't expand like the way popcorn can in their lungs. There
must be, right?
There's got to be. If not, my first product.
There you go. Start young.
So as I asked this a lot, and we didn't go as much into kind of your journey into cinema as I typically do in my episodes. So I'm going to rewind a little bit as I kind of get here. But was there a particular movie experience that made you realize that you could work in movies?
I think from the minute, that I saw Grease, part of me was hooked and wondered how I could work in the movies. I saw The Warriors, that really old film. Oh my God, that I, again, probably inappropriately watched at a very young age, but just felt like I want to be in that world, right? Mm-hmm. I can't even say, I really think it just goes back to when I saw Grease and just like sitting and how magical it felt to like be in this packed theater and sit in the aisles and watch all these people around me just love this experience so much. And I think in that moment, it just clicked for me that I knew I wanted to be in this and in this business, and I wanted to tell stories. And then for career wise, just, sitting in Cincinnati, figuring out how the hell that was going to happen, just went to every movie I could. And like I said, went to Parenthood numerous times, went to see When Harry Met Sally like as many times as I possibly could, and just absorbed every single thing I could about that way or that way those stories were told. And then, and then took a chance and left a small town and came to Hollywood trying to figure it out.
As you were watching all of those movies and you had it seems like a tremendous freedom in doing so, how did you feel like you developed your taste?
I think that because I was obsessed with horror films and then dark comedy, I think always, right? That it really, that it was like it was an undeniable path or an undeniable taste for me. I feel like everything that I was attracted to had something to say about the world that we lived in.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel very much about that right now. I mean, the stories I want to tell are like either based on something that really happened or based on something that we deal with every day. And I'm not, even if like when I did Made for Love, it was like science fiction, but it was really about an abusive relationship. So I think I studied, watching movies and watching TV. Like I just was it was a character study the entire time of just
Mm-hmm.
tiny little things and little nuances in the way people walk and obviously talk, but just what are their mannerisms,
Mm-hmm.
Just became such a great observer of that and such a lover of storytelling that way that I think it was undeniable for me. And then also like life is hard, everything, it's so hard to like, we're dealing with a difficult time now, but it seems like every year just gets harder and harder. So there's only, I'm quoting Alyssa Nutting, who created Made for Love, but we were talking and she's like, well, comedy is the only thing that hasn't tried to kill me. So that's what I think it is. That's my new thing, is to sort of like, well, of course you turn to things that make you laugh, because that also is a connector of people and ideas, or being able to, do a show like Physical where you can, shed light on a difficult subject, but with some humor,
Yeah.
that feels important.
Yeah, I always think, I mean, I don't know who said this. I feel like it's like a version of a Shakespeare quote, but how comedy is tragedy with timing.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
And it's like amazing with horror also. I was, because when it's done wrong, it's hysterical.
Yes. Oh, yes. I mean, I won't name the movie, but there was one we saw recently where I laughed out loud in the movie theater because it was so absurdly bad, And then there are ones that you watch and you're like, oh, that's art.
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
So, yeah, I'm a big fan of the horror genre, and I'm thinking starting in the new year, I'm gonna start seasons around the podcast other than just ongoing conversations. And I think my first season, because I wasn't allowed to watch horror until I was older because I was pretty scared of things. And I love horror, and especially as a genre for filmmakers to explore and discover their voice, especially visually. I think
Yeah.
horror is such an amazing medium for that. And so I'm really wanting, and then I have like a really good friend whose kid is like 8, and she's like, my son really wants to see Jaws. And I'm like, I don't know. When do you think is a good time? So,
Yeah.
it's those conversations of how do you introduce challenging subjects to your children, and through the lens of horror is somewhat interesting.
Oh, I really love that. I know my brother, like they had a big debate over when they should let their girls see the Titanic. I remember being like, it's no big deal. It's just the Titanic. Right? I didn't have kids at the time. I was like, I mean, now in hindsight, I kind of understand it, but it was like, that's just the Titanic. But obviously that's because I wasn't supervised as a child and was allowed to watch Phantasm when I was 8 years old. So.
Yeah. My son woke up very, very early this morning, and I was like, I need to turn on the TV so I can have coffee. Like I just need a few minutes. So I just like found the original Mr. Rogers, and I put it on, and the first episode is dealing with death.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that. Wow.
Like the goldfish dies and they bury it. And then he talks about his dog that died. And then they like go through this whole experience of processing grief. And I was like, not what I was expecting this morning. I wonder if this is going to go over my son's head or not. I hope it does, because I'm not ready for that conversation.
No. Oh, I didn't know that. I loved how that show did the whole thing where they like, let's talk about time. And then you just watched a clock tick for an entire minute. And they would never do that on kids shows today.
Are you kidding me? The idea of dead air space? Never.
Watch this for 60 seconds. We'll just watch this.
Yeah, I was surprised by that. I mean, the Titanic reminded me of that because, yeah, it is dealing with a massive death event. And another theme that comes up is it all really depends on the kid's sensitivity and how they feel things. My son is empathetic, and in intense moments, he'll want to sit on my lap, but then he can't take his eyes off the screen.
Right.
Gosh, he was really way too young. I put on Jurassic Park because he was so into dinosaurs. And I meant to just show him the scene when they first see the dinosaurs. And I didn't realize there was this whole scary intro that happened first. And he didn't get, he was like, oh, a dinosaur, like.
Oh, that's funny. But like, not film related, but TV. My older kids loved Stranger Things, like season 1, and Watson was 8, I think, when it came out, and he was watching, and then but very like upset when the boy had when they found the body, and I turned and he was crying, and I'm like, oh, this is not. He should not be. Shouldn't be in this living room watching this with his older sister and older brother, but just that realizing how sensitive he was now pulled into, death on, on a TV show. So,
yeah, I mean, that's another theme I'm hearing is that the younger siblings of families get exposed to much more advanced stories and topics than their age or than their older siblings did at the same age. And I hear it from my guests themselves who are younger siblings who got dragged to the theater at 2 years old to see things.
right.
And then also, in families. I'm curious for your kids, do they have a culture around going to the movies with their friends?
Yes, they go to the movies all the time. The one I will say they don't really love the Marvel stuff. They're not into that. Like that's definitely not their culture, but they will go for any horror film. And my kids are big fans of Edgar Wright. So we went to see is it Last Night in Soho? Yeah, whatever. I can't remember that one, but if that's what it's called, I think it is. And I had such a proud moment because I was sitting next to my older son. He was like, now that's a movie, and again, like I think my kids are harsh critics of films because it's just kind of our culture as a family, right? To just enjoy them and sometimes to hate watch them if they're really bad. But yeah, they're very big horror films and Edgar Wright and anything from Taika Waititi. Mm-hmm. They'll love that, but they have no desire to see. We went to see the Mission Impossible, and they were very divided over it. And I was like, well, this is the kind of movie that it is. That's what it is. It's just fun. I had fun. I thought it was great. It was super fun. And they were like, no.
What did they think about like the Knives Out series?
They loved the first Knives Out, and I think they weren't as into the Glass Onion as they were the Knives Out. So, then I think with their teens, like they're harsh critics, right? Because they pick up on stuff right away, and they're like, Knives Out felt really original, and this is just a copy of that, or it's very discerning taste sometimes.
Yeah, I'm curious how they'll feel about the new Kenneth Branagh coming out, which is an Agatha Christie, which they're all inspired by.
I think they might I think we're going to see it this weekend because I keep saying I heard it's darker than the other ones, and so I was like, I think you might like this one better than the last one. So
yeah, I have that one on my list. I don't get out to the movies as much as I would like at the moment because of the babysitter thing,
yep.
and the fatigue thing. So.
Yeah, it sounds fun until you actually have to get in the car to go.
Yeah,
yeah.
I recently saw Poltergeist at Cinespia, which was really fun.
Yeah,
I really enjoyed seeing that film and on a big screen and in a cemetery.
I need to do that. Something I need to do with my kids. Actually, I've never taken them to the cemetery for the movie. I need to do that with mine, especially because they're so dark and love all this horror shit.
So do you how old were they when you introduced your kids to horror?
I think that honestly, it would have been my older, again, back to this thing where like my daughter and my younger son shouldn't have seen it. So it would have been my older son, and he was probably 12.
Okay.
I don't remember what movie it was. I wish I could remember that. But then they very quickly, after seeing the first one, obviously we had a conversation about what's real and not real, and then sort of leaned into like, this is a stupid, absurd story, and then I think we watched one of the Halloweens together not long after that. So maybe by the time he was, I did have a sleepover once where this is going to sound terrible because they had watched, it wasn't Chucky, but they had watched a horror film and they were in middle school at the time. And none of the boys would go to sleep. And I did a terrible thing. And I came downstairs and told them that Chucky was going to come and get them if they didn't go to bed.
They're all lying in their beds.
Yeah. Right. If you don't go to sleep, Chucky's coming. And actually, you made me just remember something. I took them to see Coraline, that's their first thing that they saw that wasn't horror, but I did not know how scary that movie was, and that there was the other mother with the button eyes. So my kids were quite young, and we went to see Coraline in the theater, and it scared the living shit out of them.
Yeah, I haven't. I haven't seen that in so long. The other one I really can't wait to show my son that's sort of like horror adjacent is Beetlejuice.
Yes.
I think that for me was maybe a gateway into liking quirky, weird, kind of Halloween feeling movies like that and Edward Scissorhands.
Yes, two classics, right? I know my daughter is obsessed with Beetlejuice and I think watches it every couple of months. Yeah,
those are great ones.
So that was. Yeah,
I saw that one on. Is it on Disney?
Maybe, yeah.
I'm not sure. I was looking through stuff to put on in the background. Right now, you mentioned Up was one of the first movies. We've been watching the shorts about the Doug Days, and my son really likes them. I had put on Up, but it's a little too complicated for him still.
Right. That makes sense.
So I'm going to go ahead and ask you my last question, which is if I were to choose a film to show my son, and he can be at any age that he falls in love with cinema, what movie should I show him?
I'm going to say the original Charlie and the Chocolate Factory.
That's a great one.
Yeah. Yes. It's got all the things, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's completely absurd, but there's meaning, and they're great characters, there's comedy, and it's so well done. But the original one, for sure.
Yes, the original. I think it was like third grade or fourth grade. We put on a play version of it, and I was the gum chewing girl, and I still remember my monologue. It's not that I'm a performer in any way, really, but I love that movie so much. It was definitely a staple for me. I watched it a lot. And then I still think about the Mike TV moment when he gets turned into particles over you, because it has a lot to do with what's happening in technology today and what it means to be on a screen and screen time. It's just such a great metaphor for that.
It's such a metaphor. I think it's like there's so much nuance in that, and obviously in the way they could, even film it at that time. It just, as a story and cinematically, just stands up. And then also makes you love where we've gone to be able to tell our stories visually when you watch other versions or watch any other. I think it's just such a great place to start to kind of go, here's a really good family film.
Yeah. That movie would also make an incredible immersive exhibition.
Yes, it would.
Because you having licking smelled walls and the world a chocolate river. I guess it wouldn't be very sanitary, but it would be really fun.
Yeah, I would do that.
Or a bar mitzvah theme.
Yes, really good bar mitzvah theme.
Thank you so much for joining me today. This was a wonderful conversation.
Thank you for having me. It was such an incredible podcast. I love it.
If you enjoyed the conversation, please don't forget to like and subscribe. New episodes release every Wednesday. And leave a comment and let me know which movie you think I should show my son. Until next time, take care.